All right, I know the rules have sort of changed a little bit, but I'm going to still ask if people wear their masks, just because I'm on the that side of the age group that, again, expected value might be high, given the probability might be low, the value might be high. So looking at the expected value and the expected cost, I'll just ask if we can still go ahead and keep our masks on for this class. All right, so last time we were basically, we finished up the chapter on how, what the legal system looked like. Definitions about things, you know, that you have to submit a brief, and there's who's the plaintiff, the defendant, and what people have to do. So now what we're going to talk about is the economic theory of property. So, and if we think about just, again, we keep coming back to, you want to set up the incentives of the system such that the people behave in an efficient manner, right? So, I mean, the idea is that when I set up what the laws are, which are the rules of the game, I want to make it so that it's efficient. So let's talk just a little bit about the philosophy of property. And just three sort of major comments on what property might be. So Sir Henry Maine, when he was talking about property, he was emphasizing that it's the foundation for liberty, right? This is all about property. Property gives you freedom, right? I mean, if the idea being that if you can't own anything, then the other parties will be the ones that will be able to determine what you do. Property creates this area of liberty. Very related to this is what, for those, again, who had Econ 105, right? Mises and Hayek emphasize that property is a sphere of free action, if you sort of remember that, right? This is the place where within the place that you own, you know, your house or your car or whatever, you're able to do what you want to do in that space. And then finally, just another way of looking at it was a guy named Karl Marx, and Marx's idea was that property could be used to exploit people. How many in here have ever read the Communist Manifesto? Not too many? Really? Well, it's really short. You know, you might just go ahead and read the darn thing. But anyway, you know, a whole different emphasis on what property is about. So, major questions regarding property. Sort of think about it. What is it? Right? What is property? Is you know, especially in your era, intellectual property rights. Okay, who owns Google in some sense? What is Google? You know, as a company, and what sort of things can it own? So, you know, what are we talking about when we talk about property? How are property rights to be assigned? Right? That is, who determines who gets the property? John Locke, he sort of emphasizes the right of basically first possession. If you think about this idea that, and there's also the idea that if you don't use the property, then you lose it. And so you might say that if you landed if you were to land in what is now the United States, and you looked around and you said, oh, well, you know, nobody's using this property, I'm going to start using it, and that's what gives me possession of the property. So, how are they initially assigned? What what kind of things can be owned is very related to this. Right, as we said, intellectual property rights, or can you own the ocean? Can you own the air above your house? And if you could own the air above your house, how do you keep other people from violating your property rights? What can you do with your property? Right? Can you destroy it? Can you sell it? Can you give it away? Again, if you think through the law, just what your general knowledge of the law is, there's all sorts of laws about that kind of thing, right? So when we're developing, here's what the law is, we're thinking through what is the law today and how might it have got that way? Or, hey, maybe the law ought to be different. Maybe we've got the law sort of goofed up and maybe we ought to change the law. And then last point is, what do you do about violations of property rights? What do you do about violations of your property rights? Like if someone steals your stuff, do you have they get thrown in jail, or do you have that they have to replace it? So this whole, we have criminal law, and we talked a little bit last time that there's criminal law and civil law as well. We talked about civil law and common law, but there's this distinction between criminal law and we talk about civil law and common law. Now we're talking about criminal law and civil law. Is there do you want to throw somebody in jail for something, or do they have to reimburse you if they accidentally burn your house down? In fact, there was one of the big fires in California. I don't know if you can follow this. Happened because people were having a party and they set off some sort of smoke bomb or something, and it started a fire and it burned all sorts of other people's properties. Okay. Are they liable for that? And what would you do to punish them for having done that? All right. So so we'll start out with what we might call a legal concept of property. This whole legal, what is it? It's really a bundle of rights, right? In a sense. Okay, I have this piece of chalk. Okay, there's a bundle of rights that are associated with this piece of chalk. Can I break it? Can I give it to somebody? Whatever. So you sort of think of property as a bundle of rights, and so that tells you what you can do with it, right? Can you sell it? Right? Can you pass it on? Can you destroy it? What sort of rights do you have with this piece of property, right? So the law is going to say, hey, you own this piece of land. There's a bundle of rights that's associated with that land, and that might change over time. What we think that you can do with your property today may look very different than if it was 1263 AD in London. Okay, and it may be different in different areas of the world. And what you can do with your property may look very different in the Democratic Republic of Congo than it does in the United States. So you can sort of think of property as this bundle of rights and things that you can do with your property. So the two important concepts is that if you own the property, you have a bundle of rights that goes with it, right? So you own property, there's a bundle of rights that goes with it. Right? So the law is going to set out what those bundle of rights are and what you can do with that. Others can't others can't interfere with those rights, right? So you have these rights that you can exercise over your property. There's some legal rights that go with your piece of property, and others can't interfere with your exercise of those legal rights. Okay. Again, this creates what Hayek called a sphere of free action. Right. This is again, if you think back to for those of you who had Econ 105. Or have read Hayek's Constitution of Liberty, what does he say? He says property creates the sphere of free action. And so here's what you can do with it, and others can't come in and keep you from exercising your property rights. So that leads us to think about, okay, well, what sorts of things are to be included in this property, and what are the how are you going to protect them? How are you going to protect your rights to your property? Another thing is there some sense of responsibility that goes? Is there a responsibility that goes with these rights? Cruelty to animals, right? If you own this dog, right? I have property rights over this dog. Basically, we know that you can own dogs, right? You can own cows, all right? Can you own elephants? Well, in some places you couldn't own the elephants. The government owned the elephants, but when they found out that they made it so that individuals could own the elephants, what happened? There started to be less poaching, and people defended their elephants, etc. Okay? So, or think about blight. Okay? Actually, one of the students that I had a few years ago wrote a paper on blight. In this class, I said at the end of the semester, you have to turn in a 8 to 10 page paper on whatever topic you want in that you can fit law and economics into, and he chose to write about blight in Detroit, and so you've got this piece of property. Can you just let it go away, right? Can you just let it fall down? Well, of course. What does that create? That's sort of an externality, right? I mean, what you're doing with your property might be affecting the value of my property right next door. So do I have some responsibility that says, oh, I own this property, I've got a bundle of rights with it, but I've got this responsibility that goes with it that says I got to keep my property up. Again, what are we trying to do? We're trying to look at the incentives that are created, right? Basic economics, people respond to incentives. So when we structure the law, we want to think about what are the incentives that we've created when we establish what these laws are. And what we're going to try to do is make that the rules are efficient in some sense, right? We'd like to end up with a Pareto-optimal state of the world, for one, right? So when you go to structure what the law looks like, we ought to say, okay, if we make the law this way, then here's what the incentives have created, and are these incentives going to be such that we end up with an efficient state of the world? That leads to this idea of bargaining, right? We've already talked about bargaining a little bit. We'd like to make it so that people can bargain over their property. Now, in Econ 202 or 303, what do you assume? You assume that people are price takers, right? And the price is given. So if you're selling your property, you're a competitive firm, you can sell all you want at the market price, right? You got the perfectly elastic demand curve there in the perfect competitive firm, okay? And if you're a buyer, you can buy as much as you want. You go down to Walmart and you start buying, boxes of cereal. The price doesn't go up when you start trying to buy more cereal. So you're a price taker. There's no bargain going on. There is a statement that says, okay, hey, here's the price. Mr. Walmart tells you this is how much it costs, and you decide whether you're going to buy it or not. But if there's two parties going on, and there's a bilateral transaction going on, then what's going to happen? You can start to use game theory that we already talked about with this idea of bargaining. So I've got, we'll come back to this in a second, but I've got my guitar, and you want to buy my guitar, okay? And between the two of us, we're going to set the price, okay? So it's going to be a bargain. There's not some price for Gary Wolfram's guitar that's, sitting. Now, if I had a store where I was selling guitars, I'd have the price there. Now, there are certainly places where you could go in and you could bargain, right? You could go in and say, let's say I got the guitar sitting there for, $500 or whatever. You might come in and say, hey, I'll give you $450 for that guitar. Anybody ever bought a car? Okay, a few of you bought a car. Well, if you buy a car even if you buy a car at a car dealer, they'll oftentimes put the price up there, but you can start to bargain, right? So it depends on what the product is, whether there's bargaining going on. But if we're in a situation where you're not a price taker, where you can affect the price when you're bargaining back and forth, then you can use game theory to think about that. So, when is a bargain going to happen? Okay, it's a bargain's going to happen when the value to the seller, right, is less than the value to the buyer. Right? If the value to the seller is less than the value to the buyer, then it's going to happen. So notice that when something moves from one person to another in a bargain, like I sell you my guitar, what must have happened? I must have said, I value this less than you, right? If you buy my guitar, because now I'm happier with your money and you're happier with the guitar than with your money. So I must value the guitar less than you. And so when we move the property from the seller to the buyer, then what must have happened is there must have been a surplus in value that just went on. Okay? So when the bargain happens, when a bargain occurs, there must have been added value, right? That is, the very fact that I sold it to you tells me that you valued it more than I did, all right? And so we would like bargains to happen then. We'd like to have the rules of the game. We'd like to have the law set up so that we encourage bargaining, so that we, sort of the big picture is we're trying to encourage bargaining. And the difference is what is termed cooperation surplus. Now in Econ 202 or Econ 303, you talk about producer surplus and consumer surplus, right? That is, when you're moving along, that you get to buy the price, you get to buy at the market price, right? But the marginal benefits of the earlier units were higher than the price that you had to pay. That's why the demand curve's downward sloping, okay? And the same with the supply curve. There's a producer surplus. They're getting whatever the market price is, but the earlier ones, they would have been willing to sell at those lower prices. So that you call that, the producer and consumer surplus. Similar idea here in that there's a surplus. So, okay, so just give you an example. Suppose I value my guitar for, I value my guitar at $300. And you value it at $500. Okay? So, should have probably made it Professor Pengrasik's guitar, but y'all know he's like a super guitar player, right? He's like been he was on the cover of Guitar Magazine and stuff. He plays surf music. But anyway, super guitar player. Has anybody ever heard him play? Gone to one? Oh, you saw? Okay, yeah, all right. I went to one of his concerts in Ann Arbor one time. But anyway, so I value my guitar at $300. You value at $500. Suppose we come to a bargain and we sell at $400. Okay? So what happened was the cooperative surplus had to be the difference, right? It moved from somebody that valued it at $300 to somebody that valued it at $500. So the surplus was $200, right? The $500 minus the $300. So this guitar has moved from a value of $300, which is, what I'm willing to, that I won't sell it for less. But so I value it at $300. Now you've got it for $500, so we've increased the surplus by $200. Now, how did we divide it up? Well, we divided up depending on what the price was, right? So if it were $400, I gained 100, and you gained 100. Because you gave up $400, but it was worth $500 to you, and it was worth $300 to me, and I got $400. So that $200 got divided up between the two of us. So whatever the price ends up being is how much you're going to split. Now, if it might be that you're very good at bargaining, and so I end up selling for $350, right? So then you'd get $150 out of the $200, and I'd only get the $50. So it just depends on what the price ends up being. Now, there's a term called the threat value, or what's called BATNA. It's also called BATNA. And what is BATNA? It's the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, right? The best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which says that if we don't agree, I'm going to keep the guitar, right? I've got the 300, so you got to at least give me the 300, right? If you don't give me the 300, I'm not going to sell you a guitar. I value it at the 300. So, and for you, you're not going to pay more than 500, right? Because you don't value it more than 500. So if I say I'll sell it to you for 600, your alternative to the negotiated agreement is better than the agreement happening. So that's you also hear it referred to as threat value, or if you heard, it can even be termed threat value or BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Now, so this whole thing could explain, we already mentioned the fact that most proceedings don't end up going to trial, right? They end up being settled out of court. Either you, in a criminal case, end up pleading to a lesser charge, or if you're suing me, now what do? Now we get together and we say, okay, how about we negotiate and we won't actually go to court. And I was telling you about my friend Dean Altobelli, that I would hear him talking to his clients saying, hey, we can proceed with the suit, but you're going to pay me a boatload of money to do that. Maybe we'd be better off just settling. And so what's going on here is that in a suit, what do? You look at the for a suit, or a criminal case, you look at the cost of the proceedings. And what are you going to do? You're going to look at the expected value. Right? So you get this whole sequence of thinking about it, okay? So I'm deciding, I've now sued you. I've established that I have a cause of action. I'm the plaintiff, and I've, presented all the materials that I have to the judge, and you respond to the complaint. And so now we're sitting here, and now I'm looking at my attorney, and I'm saying, okay, let's think through what might happen, right? I might win in the case, and the judge might award me what I'm asking for, or I might, and then what might happen? You might go ahead and appeal. And then I've got the costs of going on with the appeal, et cetera, right? And so I got to figure out what's the expected value of this whole sequence of events. So I got to guess whether you're going to appeal or not, and what all these costs will be. And if we have costs of litigation are sufficiently high, what will happen is people will tend to settle out of court. And so, as I said before, and what's in the text is mentioned, is that the vast majority of both criminal cases and civil cases or suits end up being a negotiated settlement. Now, why might you form a government, right? Why might we establish laws, right, about property? Is we might solve this prisoner's dilemma of, notice that we had talked about the prisoner's dilemma, and the example that we gave was steal or not steal. Right? And so what we might form a government because you and I are negotiating, but our dominant strategy might be such that our dominant strategy is that it's worse than the cooperative strategy. So we'd like to end up with a bargain if we could, right? But we both have a dominant strategy that says don't cooperate, don't bargain. But if that's happening because of a prisoner's dilemma, because we have this dominant strategy, we'd better off having a law, right? Setting the laws up that says, thou shalt not steal, right? Is that the fifth commandment? What commandment is that? Anybody remember? Thou shalt not steal? We don't remember that. Nobody? I can just make it up then. But anyway, we know there's a commandment that says thou shalt not steal, right? Well, maybe that commandment is there as a solution to the prisoner's dilemma, right? To get us to cooperate. I agree, I'm not going to take your stuff. You agree you're not going to take my stuff, okay? And the way we're going to enforce that is we're going to have a law that says thou shalt not steal. Yeah, it's the sixth commandment. Okay, so the sixth commandment. So, why do we have that? Again, we're setting up the rules of the game. We're setting up the legal structure such that we enforce cooperation between individuals. So now, in ECON 402, and we've talked about earlier here, we have the Coase theorem, right? So what if we have a situation where your use of your property is affecting my use of my property, and how do we solve that problem? How do we solve that problem? Okay, and what did the Coase theorem say? The Coase theorem says that if transactions costs are low, actually, realistic. He says if you don't have transactions costs in the absence of transactions costs, but basically the transactions costs are low, then it doesn't matter who you assign the property right to. What has to happen is somebody has to get a property right. But you have to assign it, right? So we're going to assign a property right. And then what will happen is, in the Coase theorem, it says people will bargain. And when people bargain, then the right will go to those who value it the most. So what do we, sort of think through this is that once we establish property rights, then if transactions costs are low, then we'll bargain. Which tells you that when you're setting up the law, who's got the property right, how does it get assigned, all those, those features, when you're trying to sit down and think about the property right to the coronavirus vaccine, okay? When you're thinking about that property right, how that's going to be assigned, then you might want to, think about, okay, what are the transactions costs? And when we're writing up what the law looks like, we've got to make it so that it's clear what the property rights are. Somebody gets them, okay? And then we'd like to make it so that transactions costs are low. All right? So if we can do something that will make it so you have low transactions costs, then you can get this Coasean solution. If you value the property right at 500 and I value it at 300, then if you assign it to me, you'll buy the property right from me, right? And it will go to the highest bidder. And if you get the property right, then that's who valued it the most anyway, and I can't afford to or I won't pay you more than the right to me for it, and so it'll end up with the person that values it the most. So that again, the idea here then is that when you're making the law, we want to make sure that we make clear who's got the property rights, what those rights are, and then we'd like to make it so that transactions costs are sufficiently low. Just thinking about it, if transactions costs are really high, then to make it come out efficiently, parties aren't going to bargain. If you have something in the system that makes it so that we're not going to have a bargain, then what I got to do is I got to know who values it the most, right? I got to assign the property right to whoever values it the most to get it right, which means I got to know more if I'm the government. And if I'm the legislature or whatever, and I'm making the law, I gotta figure that out, which is probably harder to do than if we could easily bargain, right? If I could somehow make it so I reduce the transactions cost so people will come and bargain with one another, that's going to be easier to do. Then I just got to assign the property right to either party, right? So when you're setting up the system, you need to talk about, do you want to have, if there's something that really is going to impede the transaction costs, then I'm going to have to figure out who should get the property right to start with. So just make some comments about the Coase theorem. Just some basic comments about this. Two M's. One is this idea of fairness. Okay? That is, we tend to think that the party that's doing the harm is the one that should pay, right? Your cows are coming into my cornfield and eating my corn, okay? So we might say, oh, well then, the fair thing to do is to make it so that you have to pay for eating my corn. You pay the damages. But it might be that the value of that right to have the cows come in and eat my corn is greater for you, or if you've got Did I say I had the cows? Anyway, let's say I have the cows. If the value to me of having my cows eat your corn is greater than the cost of putting a fence up, right? Then what will happen is if you are assigned the property rights, then I'll be able to, I might be able to say, hey, just let my cows eat your corn. It's costing you $300, and I'll just pay you for the corn. But if the value to me is sufficiently small, then what will happen is then you will retain that property right, and I'll put the fence up, right? But we could bargain. If the value to me is greater than to you, then the efficient thing to do might be to let my cows go in and eat your corn, right? That might be the efficient way to do it. So there's a sense of, we tend to think of, oh, we should always make it so the party that's causing the damage is the one that should have to reimburse the other party. Okay, but we'd like to make it so that, hey, the one that values it the most gets it. So efficiency is going to might be different than what we think. But in addition, there's, again, when we had Econ 202, or excuse me, 402, we talked about coming to the externality. That is, what might happen is that, or coming to the nuisance. So, I'm drying my corn here, right? Because if you take your corn to Maumee, the price that you get for your corn depends on its dryness. And the drier the corn, then the higher the price for the corn. So, I don't know if you've ever driven around Hillsdale when corn harvest is going on, right? Sometimes you'll hear this loud corn drying equipment going on, okay? Now, there's 640 acres next to my corn equipment, and this person's also got, cornfields. Then what happens is they sell their 640 acres to somebody that builds a subdivision, right? So now there's an externality. Now what's going on is I'm making all this noise growing my corn or drying my corn, and now there's an externality because you've got your subdivision and you're hearing all this noise and you can't sleep, etc. Okay? But who created the externality? Did I create the externality, or did you, by building the subdivision, create the externality? Okay? So again, there's this issue in the Coase theorem. It's just pointing out that sometimes it's not clear who's creating the externality, and if you know you're going to be reimbursed, you're more likely to build the subdivision than if you think you're not going to be reimbursed. Okay? So that was an important point of the Coase theorem, in the sense that from an efficiency standpoint, it doesn't matter who has the property rights. But it does matter, right? So just as we might, right? So what we're really concerned about is efficiency, right? The Coase theorem is really talking about efficiency rather than some idea of what's fair, right? And, your concept, what is fairness? Fairness is in the eye of the beholder. So, your concept of what's fair may be the efficient outcome it's what's fair. It's the person that's going to get the property right is going to be the one that values it the most. It does matter for income distribution, though. Well, I'll just put it that way. It matters for income distribution, I'll put it that way. That is, if you're granted the right, then you have this property value and so I would rather have the right granted to me. From an efficiency standpoint, it doesn't matter from the Coase theorem who gets the right, but
whoever gets the right now has this property that wasn't there before, right? So from an income distribution point of view, it does matter who you assign the property rights to. From an efficiency standpoint, doesn't matter. It's going to go to the party that values it the most. But from an income distribution viewpoint, right, it does matter to whom you assign the property rights. And so, you know, again, the party that gets the property right has now got a valuable piece of property that they can sell to the other person. So it will matter from an income distribution point of view. So if you care about the distribution of income, then you'll assign it to the person, let's say you want to assign it to the person that's the lowest income, right? If somehow you knew that. I mean, that could be that's how you could set the law up if you wanted, right? Of course, you'd have to know what the, you know, people's incomes were, et cetera. I mean, it might be hard to actually apply that, but just essentially that makes a point. You know, if this is something that's a very large bundle of goods, a very large property, and if the income effects of assigning the property rights are large, these are just other things that might, so when you're thinking through what might happen, if the income effects are large, then what that might do is that might alter the demand for different types of goods and services. Okay, the people who got the property, you know, it might be a whole mass of people. The way you assign the property right, if the people who get the property have different income than the people who don't have the property rights, then that could affect the demand for other goods and services. Just like anything where we have an income redistribution, right? If you have an income redistribution, then what's going to happen? The people that are going to have the income now, they're going to buy more of goods that are normal goods for them, and they'll buy less of goods that are inferior goods for them. So you may have changed the demand and supply for goods as a whole. There's also what we call an endowment effect. And this brings in, you know, we talked about behavioral economics a little bit. And why did you want to know about behavioral economics? To see if people are systematically irrational, where they, you know, if they have risk aversion or whatever, if they're systematically that way, we can, again, we're trying to create the law to set up incentives that will result in efficient outcomes. Okay? If we understand how that works, it will affect what our legal structure looks like. But an endowment effect, it turns out that people demand more to give up something. This is sort of weird, but they do. They demand more to give up something they have than they would pay to obtain it. That is, if they had to sell their car, they're going to need a higher price to get for their car than if they didn't have the car and went out to buy the car. So that's called the endowment effect. And if that's the case, then it can affect what the price is for the bargain in when the transaction happens, right? So if what we're doing is we're using the Coase theorem, and we're going to say the parties will exchange the property right, it could affect, that could affect what it could affect the price of the exchange. That is, it could affect the price that the property rights are traded by. And finally, you might have social norms. Social norms might solve some externality issue. So think about this for a minute. You're going to mow your lawn on Saturday morning, right? And you got a lawnmower. You're not using a push mower that just, you actually got a motor with your lawnmower. How many have ever used a lawnmower that doesn't have a motor? That just, okay, there's a couple of you. Yeah, okay, all right. So good, a little exercise. But most people, when they mow their lawn, are using, either their regular mower that they, crank it up and start it, or pull a thing to start it. Or some people have a riding mower, right? But anyway, it makes noise, right? So question is, on a Saturday morning, would you feel comfortable mowing your lawn at 8 o'clock in the morning? Probably not, right? Certainly not at 7 o'clock in the morning. 9 o'clock in the morning, now you're starting to think, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning. For sure 10 o'clock in the morning, right? So nobody's going to wake up on a Saturday morning and it's 10 o'clock and the neighbor's mowing the lawn and say, oh, they're being such a jerk, right? They're out there mowing their lawn and making noise at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, okay? But if they were doing it at 7 o'clock in the morning, you'd be going, wow, they're really being a jerk, right? So social norms can solve some of these externality issues. That is, this is the custom, and this is the custom and tradition that we do it. All right, so let's just close a little bit with this issue of transactions costs. Okay, and so what did we just say? If the transactions, what Coase theorem says, if transactions costs are sufficiently low, doesn't matter who gets the property right? They'll bargain to the solution. But if transactions costs are high, then it does matter who gets it, right? So if these things are high, then it matters who gets it. Who gets the property right? So if, for example, Detroit Edison is making electricity and it's causing $1,000 in pollution damages and it's $1 to each of 1,000 people, then the transactions cost is going to be pretty high. It's going to be hard for you, each of you, to get together and pay pay DTE to give up that property right. So if DTE could put something on their smokestack for $500 and eliminate the pollution, right, what we'd like to have, you guys should have the right. But if we give it to DTE, it's going to stick with them because the transaction costs of you guys all getting around to be able to make a bargain with Detroit Edison to get them to put the smokestack on is going to be high. So when we look at the high transaction costs, then, what do? They're going to require that we know who values it the most. If we're going to be efficient, right? If it's going to go to the person that values it the most, it's going to require that we know who values it the most. And we might be able to figure that out. It might be sort of obvious, but the point here is that in the absence, when transactions costs are low, the law ought to just make it so that somebody has clear, defined property rights, and we want to make it so that the cost of bargaining is low, right? That the transactions costs are low. If we can make up the rules of the game. Just quickly as an example, making the Nature Conservancy. What does that do? The Nature Conservancy can gather up money from your donations, and then the Nature Conservancy can go out and buy the piece of property, right? so that the Nature Conservancy is buying the property right away from the people that would have it because you guys want the open space, or you just going to feel better about knowing that this, the space is being protected. And what did that do? It reduced the cost of the transactions, right? Each of us can send off some money to the Nature Conservancy. So the creation of that entity that says we're going to make an entity called the Nature Conservancy, the law allows for that, that's going to act to reduce the transactions cost. All right, so for next time what we're going to do is we're going to look at the elements of transactions costs and talk a little bit more about BATNA, and so we're moving forward in the chapter on property rights. Okay. And you know, I sent you out an email that Professor Butters usually has these things by the afternoon of the lecture. So if you happen not be able to come to class for some reason, you can go and look at them. Or if there's something that you didn't quite understand, you could go back and look at it. All right?